The genesis of it came about when we were rehearsing another show of his, I forgot, Reluctant Citizen. And in rehearsal, which was going very well, Patty was free to sort of walk around and not pay that much attention to what was going on in rehearsal. He got to looking at the signs around the ballroom of the Abbey Hotel, which at night was a Lonely Hearts Club. And one of the signs specifically said, "Girls, dance with the man who asks you. Remember, men have feelings too." And he became quite intrigued with that, and he came up to me at a break in rehearsal and said, "I think I want to write a show about a place like this, about a girl who comes to a place like this." And I sort of gave him the brush and said, "Fine, Patty, that's a great idea." And at the next break in rehearsal, he came up to me again. He said, "I've changed my mind. I want to write about a man who comes to a place like this." And I said, "Patty, that's a hell of an idea. Go do it." And so he went off and told Fred about that much. A lonely man meets a girl at a dance hall, and Fred said, "Go write it, Pappy." About one show beyond the Reluctant Citizen, for the only time in my entire over 100 Philco shows, a script came in that was just absolutely undoable. It was just not salvageable. It was just a total mess. I finished reading it on that Monday morning, and I walked across the hall to Fred, and he was just finishing reading it because it had just come in that morning. And we looked at each other, and I said, "Fred, we can't do this." And he said, "I know." And I said, "What are we going to do?" He picked up the phone and called Patty at home and said, "Pappy, how are you coming with that Lonely Hearts story?" By that time, Patty had called it Love Story. That was its title. Patty said, "Well, I've got the first act written. I'm working on the second act, and I've got the third act blocked in my mind, so I know where it's going." Fred said, "How soon can you have it?" Patty said, "Well, give me a couple of weeks." Fred said, "How about Thursday?" Literal story. And Patty said, "Well, I'll finish up the second act tomorrow. I'll get on the third as quick as I can, and I'll get it to you as soon as I can." So we set forth casting calls, cast Rod Steiger with the first act in hand. He accepted the part on the basis of that. We cast Nancy Marchand with the second act in hand, because that's the only act in which she appeared, and we went into rehearsal on Saturday with 2 acts in hand and the rest of the cast set. We didn't know what the third act was going to wind up being. Patty came into rehearsal fairly early on, and how he had gotten it mimeographed, this was before Xeroxing, he brought the script. And we stopped the rehearsal and sat down and read the third act and put it into rehearsal immediately. And we knew from the first 2 acts that we had an unusual show. It had the elements to it. When we got the third act, we knew that we had a great script. And he did not do very many changes in it during rehearsal, very little. He was forced to change the title. The only time that NBC ever objected to a title. They didn't want Love Story, said nobody will watch that. And we fooled around and finally came up with Reluctantly Found Marty, and just called it that because we didn't have anything else to call it.
Why Rod Steiger as Marty?
Rod was an actor who had worked for us several times. And literally the only other actor that we even considered was Marty Ritt. And Marty had done The Paperbox Kid just shortly before that. But I had never worked with Marty, and I had known Patty, I had known Rod, and Rod was extraordinarily well attuned to this role. The only problem that I had with Rod in rehearsal was that his tremendous emotional involvement in everything that he does was so strong that he would really literally break down and weep. In the blue suit, gray suit scene, the tears would just course down his cheeks, and I kept on him. I'd say, "Rod, don't cry. Let the audience cry. Hold it in. You want to cry, but don't let it out." And he'd nod, and he'd play the scene, and the tears would come down his cheeks. Fred's almost only note on Thursday was, "Hey, you got to talk to Rod. Don't let him cry." I said, "Fred, I'm trying. I'm doing the best I can." In dress rehearsal, the tears were still on Rod's face. And I went down to the last note I gave, "Rod, let the audience cry. Hold it in." And as I got into the chair, Fred standing beside me said, "Is he going to do it?" I said, "Fred, I don't know. Here we go." And Rod did it. And he contained it. And it was wonderful. It was the best he ever played it.
This was a major turning point in your own career, was it not?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. When Patty sold the script to Harold Hecht, Patty, having had one Hollywood experience in which he had lost control of his script, and it was changed, and he didn't have anything to say about it, insisted that I go along as the director because we worked well together. Because it was such a very low-budget picture, he forced Harold Hecht to accept me, although I had never been to Hollywood, I'd never been on a soundstage, I'd never seen a picture being made. But I went along.
And maybe one of the first times that a television show was being translated to the big screen.
It was the first time.
It was the first
time for a major television show to be done on screen.
Why was the casting so different for the movie?
Harold Hecht wanted a show that would have the emotional impact that the television show did. It would be twice as long. The original show was about 48 minutes long, filling an hour slot, and this one would be about 90. He wanted the same impact, but he did not want the audience to perceive this as being just a remake of the television show. Same cast, same director, same scriptwriter, but a slightly longer script. He wanted as much change as possible. Patty and I both argued for Rod. We wanted him very much, wanted Nancy Marchand very much. But Harold, without denying us, kept trying to suggest other people. Out of that came Ernie Borgnine, whom I had worked with many times in Philco before he came out to Hollywood and became famous as Fatso Judson in From Here to Eternity. He became known as Fatso. That was his biggest role to that point, and he got a lot of notice on that without any question, but not a major star. He was shooting Bad Day at Black Rock, where again he was playing a villain up at Lone Pine, California. Patty and I went up by a small plane, which Harold chartered for us. He had been sent a script. Came off the set late in the afternoon, came in sweaty and dirty and with a stubble of beard, and we sat in his little motel room. Patty lay down on the bed, and I read the 2 or 3 scenes with Ernie. I knew him, I liked him, I knew he was gentle. He was not the villain that he had played on the screen, which is all that Hollywood knew of him. But as soon as he started to read, I looked over at Patty a couple of times, and our eyes met, and we were both saying, yeah, he can do it. And we went back to California and told Harold, yeah, he was our man. We did the same thing with Betsy Blair, Gene Kelly's wife, in the role of Clara, although we had wanted Nan Marchand for that. But in the other 3 roles played by Joe Mantell and Augusta Cioli and the mother, we simply could not find actors that were the equivalent of the television cast. So we cast those 3 people, the mother, the aunt, and Angie, the pal, with the original actors. Everybody else was changed.